So, if you're anything like me, you've probably been in a situation where you have a huge test or exam coming up and you really don't feel like studying. What ends up happening instead is that you go on YouTube Shorts or you scroll through Instagram, and before you know it, it's already been 2 hours and you haven't gotten anything done. We all procrastinate, and we procrastinate because we're just not feeling it right now. We just don't have the motivation to get started, which is why today I'll be sharing 4 mental gymnastics that I use to hack my motivation when I just don't feel like working. First up is the Boggart Banishing charm. So in the Harry Potter universe, there are these shapeshifter things called Boggarts, and they assume on the observer's worst fear. And in order to defeat these Boggarts, we have to use the charm Ridiculous in order to transform that Boggart into something that is ridiculously funny. We can do something similar when we're studying. When there's a scary deadline looming in our immediate future and we're really behind on studying, that's pretty scary. Putting our heads down and just getting to work would obviously make it less scary, but we just don't have the motivation for that. So what can we do that's ridiculously easy and will also help us make progress towards our goal? This uses the progress principle, which is something that Dr. Teresa Amabile explains pretty well. A lot of things that can boost emotion, motivation, and perceptions during a workday. The single most important thing is making progress in meaningful work. In other words, progress is motivating, but just knowing this isn't enough. We need to figure out the fastest way to see some progress. Ideally, something that is ridiculously easy, because right now, our motivation is pretty non-existent. For you, it might be just rereading a lecture instead of actively making notes. Or maybe it's just skimming through past papers instead of actively testing yourself. Lower the threshold and reduce the task to its easiest form. That way, it reduces the amount of motivation you need in order to get started. For me, this was watching anatomy videos on YouTube. I made progress because I was understanding the topic better, and this was honestly ridiculously easy. All I had to do was watch YouTube. Use the progress that you make as the activation energy for getting started. If you can't find a way to reduce your task to its easiest form, try my second tip. Treat cliffhangers. So, cliffhangers are really annoying if you're watching an episode of a K-drama and it cuts right at that scene and you know that the next episode doesn't air until Wednesday of next week. But why exactly do cliffhangers work? Well, besides having elements of good storytelling, cliffhangers leave loose ends untied. They're just dangling in the air, taunting us and trapping our attention. In the world of psychology and productivity, cliffhangers go by another name, attention residue. As Professor Sophie Leroy explains, people need to stop thinking about one task in order to fully transition their attention and perform well on another. Yet results indicate it is difficult for people to transition their attention away from an unfinished task, and their subsequent task performance suffers. Basically, attention residue happens when we switch from one task to another task without finishing the first task. Our attention is stuck on the previous task, and because part of our attention is distracted, our efficiency and productivity on the second task also suffers. So, attention residue sounds like a bad thing, right? Shouldn't this be something that we should avoid? Well, not necessarily. We can actually use attention residue to our advantage when we're procrastinating by starting on a single task with a very small step and then stop it. If you need to write an essay, just open up a Word document and type the very first sentence. If you need to study and you need to do some more past papers, just read the very first question. Don't even try to answer it, just stop there and close it. Having these tasks started but unfinished opens these tabs in your mind. We're already procrastinating anyways, so attention residue can't really hijack our productivity if we're not even working. The trick is, however, to be very timely in when you procrastinate. Procrastinate right after you start the very first step. What this does is it leaves a mental tab open in our brain. When we stop writing or studying or working and we switch to something else, part of our attention is still on that open tab that is waiting for the next action. The way I imagine it is that my brain gets a bit annoyed and irritated because it doesn't like having this mental background of a bunch of open tabs. As we work on something else, part of my brain is still thinking about that unfinished question, and my brain actually gets a bit mad because there's a lot more attention being focused on the unfinished task. after we do this, it's now actually easier for us to revisit the task and keep going. Because number one, part of our attention is already there. And number two, we've already started. We've got the first step done. So we know where to pick up and keep going. In essence, we're using our attention residue to create cliffhangers, making it easier for us to get started again. Now, if the previous two tricks still haven't worked and you want some more mental games, this one might be for you. I call this the silent treatment. Basically what I do is I sit down in front of my computer, I close all the tabs, and I force myself to sit in silence. I'm already not working, so I'm not really wasting any time because I'm not even being productive. But I tell myself, okay, you can choose to not do any work right now, but you also can't switch and do any other task either. Just sit there, stare at the screen, and most importantly, think. Most of the time, when I'm low on motivation, my instant gratification monkey is basically running amok and bouncing off the walls, trying to convince myself to just screw studying and go watch a Chinese drama or go binge eat some snacks. My brain and my mental thoughts are all feeling really chaotic, and in general, I feel really stressed, anxious, and really restless. What I find to be really helpful is silence. During this period of silence, I force myself to think about how I got into this situation to begin with. Here are some suggestions. Number one, ask yourself why this is important. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Question your assumptions about whether or not what you're actually doing is going to help you move towards your goal. Is this really the best way that you should be using your time in order to study for the exam? Or is there an alternative way that might be slightly easier for you to also reach that same goal? Do you really need to be actively taking notes out of your textbook? Or is it enough to just skim through the chapter again and answer the textbook questions? Number two, think about why you're procrastinating. I find that for me, oftentimes I'm procrastinating because I just feel really overwhelmed about the amount of material that I have to get done. I don't know where to get started, or maybe I just don't understand the concept. And it definitely isn't motivating to start studying if you don't even understand what you're trying to learn. Identify the reason behind why you're procrastinating and be specific. Don't just say it's hard. Why does it feel hard? For example, when I was procrastinating last month studying for my exams, I found that I was procrastinating on the upper respiratory past papers because I just really didn't like the lecture. And I didn't really like the lecture because I didn't really understand what it was talking about. So once I've identified that the reason why I'm procrastinating on these past papers is because I don't actually understand the concept, it makes it easier for me to address the root problem. What I ended up doing is I went on YouTube and I found some videos talking about the structures within the larynx. And after watching that video, I found that, oh, it's actually not that bad. I actually kind of have a big picture of how all the different cartilages function and where their attachment sites are. After I've understood the topic, then I bump it slightly up. I reread the lecture. Now the lecture makes more sense, and I no longer hate the lecture because I kind of understand it. And after I reread the lecture, and then finally move on to doing past papers. And I find that doing past papers actually aren't that bad because I understood the concept. So just procrastinating on past papers, you need to think about why you're procrastinating in order to address the root problem. The third question you can ask yourself is, how can I learn from this task? This idea is something I learned from Elizabeth Phillips. Identify the skills that you can gain from a task rather than the end result. For example, writing an essay would get your essay done, which is the result. But along the way, the skills you might learn would be improving your reading comprehension and improving your ability to communicate your ideas clearly. These are skills that you might value in order to be a good communicator and to be a good friend in relationships. By reframing the task as the skills that you can learn from the task, it's more motivating because you're actually learning things that you will keep using in life instead of just handing in that assignment for class. When all three reflective questions still fail, I resort to using gratitude. I think that at the end of the day, we should all be thankful that we had the opportunity to feel stressed about an exam because it means that we are taking exams. We have the opportunity to attend class. We have the opportunity and access to an education. I'm sure there are people out there who would love to have the opportunity to go to school, to study towards this degree. I had this kind of epiphany when I was studying for my med exams. This is kind of where I've wanted to be in life. Now that I have the opportunity, why am I complaining? There might be some people who wanted to get in med school, who would love to have the opportunity to stress for a med school exam. I think having an education is something we often take granted, or we don't realize how lucky it is for us to have the opportunity to complain about taking the exam. We just end up taking this for granted. And when I reframe this as, I'm so lucky that I get a chance to study for a medical school exam, it kind of fuels me with motivation, and I get a lot less stressed and a lot less neurotic. This mental shift makes me also feel a bit ashamed because I'm honestly so lucky to have this opportunity. So whenever you're feeling unmotivated, maybe try, I would say, not guilt-tripping yourself, but just be thankful that you have this opportunity to study for an exam. Ultimately, these are just some suggestions as to the things that you can think about during your silent treatment. I think it's quite productive to think about why we're doing the things we're doing before we actually get started with working, and it can give you a lot more clarity and motivation to get started. However, if you find that sitting still just doesn't really work for you, try this last mental gymnastics. Check it out of the picture. Some people argue that motivation is a myth. What we really need is discipline. And although I don't fully agree with this thesis, I can see a way of removing motivation from the equation in order to help us get stuff done. Language has a huge impact on our thoughts and behavior. And when we remove motivation from the picture, we no longer have to rely on it as a motivator to get us start working. Instead of thinking that you need to feel motivated in order to start working, just think, I need to study, period. And because I need to study, I'm going to go study. Instead of giving yourself the autonomy, the choice to choose about whether or not you're going to study, treat it as something that you just do. This is something you just do, and you don't need to rely on motivation. You never needed to rely on motivation to go to your chemistry class after attending your math class in high school. It was just something that happened. And this is the same thing I think about when I remove motivation from the entire equation. I'm just gonna do my Alki cards because this is what I do. In a sense, it's also part of my identity. By removing the choice, I can close the gap between thinking and behavior. And I just get started. Now, of course, part of this does depend on having some sheer willpower, but I find that if I can sheer willpower through the first 5 minutes of the task, keep on going afterwards isn't hard. The hardest part is just getting started. And if I have enough sheer willpower to do that and tell myself that I don't need motivation to do it, I just need to do it, then it's enough for me. Ultimately, these are all mental gymnastics that you can play on yourself, and it changes the way you think or it helps you reframe the entire task. Nothing has actually changed. The task is still there. You're still behind. You still have a lot of work to do. But if you change the way you think and approach the situation, it can help make getting started a lot easier. If you found these tips helpful, please leave me a comment down in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!